Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming and taking the time to take an interest in an Australian film. As Kitty kindly mentioned, yes, my name is Mojgan. I was born in Iran, and we came out of Iran as a result of the persecution of the Baha'is, because my family happened to be followers of the Baha'i faith. And in 1979, we left Iran and we moved to Spain, where we could quickly get out because there was an opportunity to live in Spain just on a tourist visa, which we could indefinitely renew. And we did that for 3 years, renewing a tourist visa until we got a visa to Australia. And we came here in 1981. I'm most interested in the topic of prejudice because I think that prejudice had a lot to do with the fact that the Baha'is of Iran had to flee, and we are not the only minority group who have to flee their own country due to prejudice. I'm sure that you're aware of a whole lot of other people around the world who have to then escape their own land for whatever reason, whether it be religious or cultural or political or ethnic or whatever it is. So prejudice is a topic that really is of great interest to me, and it has made a great difference to my life. I'm very grateful to be living in Australia, and I've had every opportunity that my heart could desire. I have worked in the film industry, and it has given me a great deal of pleasure. So tonight I'll be speaking about a film that I was lucky enough to write and direct in the year 2000. It was released here in Australia. And the film is mainly a love story, but it is a love story set in the battlefields of prejudice. And the prejudice is both cultural and religious. The writing of Serenades was based on basically the two topics of where prejudice finds its way to make life into a battlefield, and that's the battlefield of love and the battlefield of the soul, where each religion is trying to say that a soul belongs to them, or it's protected better by their particular way of looking at the soul and what it needs to do. Later on in this talk, we will be talking about the soul, and I'll be asking some of the members of the audience to read some excerpts from different holy scriptures, and if you could read them nice and loud so everyone can hear them, otherwise I'll bring you the microphone. Now, while I was writing Serenades, I looked into two books that became prominent in my research. One was a book called Tin Mosques and Ghan Towns, and it depicted the history of the Afghan cameleers here in Australia. And the second book was White Man's Dreaming, and it depicted the history of the Lutheran German missionaries, in particular a mission station by the name of Kilalpanina, which was set up amongst the Diri Aboriginal people. And the Diri people lived on the eastern side of Lake Eyre, in the northern outback lands of South Australia. These two books were both written by the same lady, a lady by the name of Christine Stevens, and the two books engaged my interest, and I kept reading and reading. And what I was reading about was of great interest to me because it dealt with prejudices that came up and battlefields of love and religion. So I kept reading. The three groups that the two books were informing me about were the Afghans, who were mostly Muslims, some were Hindu and some were Sikhs, and they had been brought here by a particular businessman by the name of Thomas Elder. You may know of the Elder's Real Estate. The Elder's Real Estate was set up by Thomas Elder's brother. They were a very prominent family, and they did quite a lot in this state to set up pastoralist and commercial endeavors. The first camels were brought out here by Thomas Elder. The second group were the German Lutheran missionaries. They came to South Australia to teach the Lutheran Christianity to the Aboriginal people of this land. And they suffered a lot in the outback because it was hot and extremely different to the conditions where they came from in Germany. But they were most adamant to teach their faith to the Aboriginal people, so they stayed. And the native Australian Aborigines, who were the Diri Aborigines in that part of Australia, as I mentioned before. Now, when people get together, no matter of what nationality or religion, they're likely to fall in love. And they are likely to have relationships. And depending on who they fall in love with and who they want to have a relationship with, at that particular time, some of those relationships, which were interracial, were against the law. When the law supports prejudice as far as interracial relationships is concerned, that law can find its way into legislation and become known as something like anti-miscegenation law. This was definitely a law that was happening at the time all over the world, including Australia. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, anti-miscegenation law, which is basically miscegenation is a combination of two Latin words, miseria, which means to mix, and genus, which means kind. And so anti-miscegenation laws were making it a forbidden crime for two people of different race or different color of skin to have a relationship. In Australia, in South Australia, according to the Northern Territory Aboriginals Act of 1910, the celebration of marriage of a female Aboriginal with any person other than an Aboriginal without the permission in writing of a government-appointed protector was forbidden. And certainly no Aboriginal protector or chief protector at that time would give a written consent to an interracial marriage. Therefore, interracial marriage or any kind of a relationship in a legal sense was an impossibility. In 1904, a royal commission was undertaken into the condition of Aboriginal people. As I said to you, there were protectors of Aboriginal people, and the chief protector of the Indigenous people in Australia was a man by the name of Walter Roth. And he made the main contribution to the Royal Commission of 1904. And the evidence taken by Walter Roth included graphic stories of the sexual habits of Australian white men, not just itinerant workers and shepherds, but also station owners and police. In his report, which was presented to Parliament in 1905 here in Australia, Walter Roth concluded bluntly that comboism is rife. And comboism was the word used to describe casual relationships between white men and Aboriginal women. So not marriage, but a casual relationship. And this was illegal, and it was punishable by law. It might be of interest to you to know that during that investigation for the Royal Commission, Walter Roth was involved in an incident which led to a huge controversy. And the incident was described by some people as a heinous crime that shocked the conscience. And this controversy led to Walter Roth resigning from his position in 1906, only a year after the Royal Commission. I'm not going to discuss what he did or what that incident was, but if you're interested, it is in Wikipedia, and if you just look up Walter Roth, you can read all about it. 60 years later, in 1965, on the other side of the world in the United Nations, and interracial relationships were still considered illegal in the southern states, the red part of the map, the southern states of the United States, until a landmark decision was made in a case known as Loving versus Virginia on the 12th of June 1967. The case was brought before the courts by Mildred and Richard Loving. Their surname was Loving. And in order to get married from their home state of Virginia in the south of the US, they had to travel to Washington, where interracial marriage was allowed. But when they got married and they returned to Virginia, to their home, they were sentenced to 1 year in prison for marrying each other. This was in 1958. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just share with you a short video of their story because I think it's most fascinating.
Richard and Mildred Loving returned to their home in Caroline County, Virginia, after marrying in Washington, D.C. Richard was white, Mildred was black. They were arrested and charged with felony offenses, since interracial marriage was illegal under Virginia law. Facing prison time, the Lovings pleaded guilty to the charges in 1959, received a suspended sentence, and were ordered to leave the state for 25 years. The Lovings challenged the law in 1964 and were once again arrested while visiting family members in Virginia. After an unsuccessful first trial in state courts, they appealed to the United States Supreme Court to hear the case. On June 12, 1967, the court unanimously decided Loving versus Virginia in favor of the Lovings, declaring interracial marriage bans unconstitutional and striking down similar laws in 18 states. The court acknowledged the laws were rooted in racism and denounced them as measures designed to maintain white supremacy. The Lovings returned to Virginia and lived as husband and wife with their 3 children. After the ruling, states that had never legally recognized an interracial marriage were forced to do so, but opposition lingered. In 2000, Alabama became the last state to repeal its interracial marriage ban, when its residents voted to remove an anti-miscegenation provision from the state constitution more than 30 years after Loving made it unenforceable.
It's most interesting to know that, as you heard in the video, in regards to the abolition of the anti-miscegenation law in the US, even though in 1967 the US Supreme Court unanimously ruled that anti-miscegenation laws were unconstitutional, nevertheless, for the law to be annulled in the various southern states of America, a state referendum, a state referendum needed to be held in order to repeal or annul and change the law in that state. And after a few referendums between the years 1967 and the year 2000, finally, in the year 2000, the law of anti-miscegenation was finally annulled in the state of Alabama in the US. Even then, 526,000 voters wanted to keep the law. Recent statistics taken in the United States and around the world clearly show that interracial marriages are increasing at a phenomenal rate. There is no stopping it. Love finds its way from a heart to another heart no matter what race or religion. So according to these statistics, something like 2% increase is taking place every 10 years. However, prejudice also rears its head on a regular basis. In October 2009, a justice of peace in Louisiana, a man by the name of Keith Bardwell, refused to issue a marriage license to an interracial couple. In an interview, he said to the media, "I'm not a racist. I just don't believe in mixing the races that way. My main concern is for the children. There is a problem with both groups accepting a child from such a marriage. I think those children suffer, and I want help put them through it." When we talk about the birth of a child, we're talking about the birth of a new soul. We are talking about a love affair between two people whose sexual activity leads to procreation, and a new child is born. If divorce eventuates in an interracial marriage, and the statistics are saying the possibility of divorce is high, then the child does run the risk of suffering in both the battlefields of love and the battlefield of the soul, which can become entangled in horrible prejudice in the midst of a very messy divorce. So, perhaps Mr. Keith Bardwell has a point when he says, "I think these children suffer." He was depicted in the media as a racist, as a redneck bigot, but he allegedly told Mr. Terence Mackay, who wanted to be married, that 99% of interracial marriages end up in divorce. And that is a true, unfortunate statistic. So maybe Mr. Bardwell was trying to protect any future children born to this interracial couple from the battlefield of love by refusing to marry them in the first place. So could it be said that his intention was the protection of the children? The desire to protect children of interracial and interreligious liaisons from harm was the theme that gave birth to the creation of the character of Jilla, who is the main character in the film Serenades. Her looks were inspired by the well-known National Geographic picture of the Afghan girl, which coincided with the description of the part Afghan, part Aboriginal children that I read about during my research in the books Tin Mosques and Gun Towns, A White Man's Dream. As an illegitimate and illegal child, Jilla is a character that is up for grabs. There are 3 opposing cultures and religions that surround her, and the battle for custody of her body and soul became the main conflict of the story in Serenades. Now, the adults in her world all wanted to protect her. That was their main intention. As it happened, her grandfather and her mother, who are Aborigines, in their belief, if a child is born under a particular tree, which usually happens to be the same tree that her mother is born under, if that tree is somehow cut or harmed, then that can cut the life of the mother. And I will show you a clip in a minute about that in the film. That was one side of the 3 cultures surrounding her. The other side is the Afghan, and that's her father, who is a Muslim. And he believes that in order to protect the child, he needs to give her a necklace which contains a verse of the Quran, and she needs to wear that necklace at all times in order to be protected. And the third party is the Lutheran German mission station, where she ends up for a short while in her life. And in that camp, or in that institution, she is baptized with the Eucharist, which the Lutheran missionaries believe will protect her in the long run. So I'll just share with you in a row 3 very short excerpts from the film, which are really dealing with the battle of custody that takes place in Jilla's life when all three parties want to have her for themselves.